Good evening, councillors and members of the public. Before we commence the meeting, I would like to draw your attention to the fire regulations which are on the screen behind me and the small screen up there facing the public gallery. Could you all please ensure that your mobile phones are switched to silent, and councillors, can I remind you as usual to speak directly into the microphone and make sure that your card is pushed firmly into the console. Members of the public, please be respectful of the other members in the gallery and of course the committee members as well. Thank you very much. So to move on, or before we move on to the items of business, I'd like to introduce the officers sitting at the table here. Oh, Councillor Lee's making a protest. This is a walkout. Have I said something wrong?
No, he's not speaking.
No. Okay. So on my left we have Lewis Jones, the planning lawyer. Next to him is Elizabeth Sims, whom you all know as head of planning. Louise Jandel, area team leader, and our new friend Richard Fox, the development manager.
Yeah, good evening, members of the public and councillors. Nice to see you again.
Good. Thank you. Minutes of the last meeting have been on the table before you for the last 30 minutes. Can I sign those as a true record?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Amy, any apologies for absence or declarations of substitutes?
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies from Councillor Nazir.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest?
None before the meeting, Chairman.
Any questions from the public?
None received, Chairman.
Questions from members?
None received.
Right. The performance against government targets, we did run through those last week, and there's nothing additional to report, so the next performance report will come to the meeting on the 8th of August. So to move on to the main items of business this evening, item 7 is application for planning permission, reference NMA 2018-0049, land at East Street, Farnham, amendment to permission WA 2016-0268 to provide alterations to approved phasing plan. And I would invite Louise to present the application to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Which is outlined in red on your screen now. Planning permission was granted and implemented under reference number WA 2012-0912 for a mixed-use redevelopment comprising retail, restaurant, cafe bar accommodation, residential units, cinema, car parks, highway and access works, provision of infrastructure and landscaping, and the demolition and clearance of the site. Condition 2 of this permission required phasing plans of the construction to be approved by the Council prior to the commencement of development. These details were subsequently submitted and agreed in 2015. A subsequent Section 73 application was submitted under reference number WA 2016-0268. This sought various changes to the main development, and this application was approved. The condition of this permission required the development to be undertaken in accordance with the previously agreed phasing plans. Phasing plan conditions are standard on large developments. The purpose of a phasing plan condition is to ensure that details that are required by condition can be linked to the commencement of various phases of construction, in recognition of the fact that the development will not be built in one single whole. This application is for a non-material amendment to make changes to the phasing plans already agreed by the Council. A significant amount of time has passed since the original phasing plans were agreed, and since this time, the applicant has undertaken further works on the detailed development programme. As a result, the phasing plans have changed, and Condition 1 of Planning Permission WA 2016-0268 needs to be amended to reflect these changes. Councillors should note that this is not a planning application. This is an application for a non-material amendment. In deciding whether a change is material, the local planning authority must have regard to the effect of the change, together with any previous non-material changes, as to the planning permission as originally granted. Therefore, the planning merits of the proposed amendments are not before the Council. The focus is instead whether the proposed amendments are material or not. The only consideration in the assessment of this application is therefore whether the proposed changes to the phasing plans are deemed material to the East Street development as a whole when it was approved. The phasing of this development consists of 33 phases, with enabling works starting earlier this year in May 2018 and the scheme being completed in September 2022. The phasing plans are extremely detailed, and as such, I will just take you through the main key elements of the phasing. The most significant change to the phasing plan is the removal of Brightwall Cottage prior to the completion of the construction bridge, and this takes place in Phase 10, which commences the week commencing the 17th of September. It has previously been agreed that the development would not commence, including demolition, until the construction of the bridge is completed from the A31. However, Brightwall's Cottage needs to be removed to make way for the Hall Road, which leads off the bridge, and also for services development to take place. It is proposed to keep the spoil from the cottage on site and only remove it via the bridge once this has been constructed. The applicants have advised that the vehicles and equipment required to undertake the demolition of the cottage will already be on site due to the other preparatory works which are currently taking place. Therefore, the early demolition of Brightwall Cottage would not result in a significant increase in traffic congestion around the development site. Officers therefore consider that this change to the phasing plan is acceptable. Just take you through some of the other sort of main elements of the phasing. Phase 14 commences on the 10th of December 2018 with the completion of the bridge. Phase 15 commences also on the 10th of December 2018 with the commencement of the main demolition works on site, with access to these taking place over the bridge. Phase 16 commences on the 4th of March 2018 with the excavation for the building in the northeast of the site, just here. Phase 17 commences on the 1st of April 2019 with the work starting on buildings in the northwest and southwest part of the site. Phase 19 commences on the 15th of April 2019 with highway works on East Street. Phase 20 commences on the 20th of January 2020 and includes the works to Brightwell House. Phase 26 commences on the 15th of March 2021 and includes the landscaping in the centre of the site. And finally, Phase 33 commences on the 26th of September 2022, and this is the completion of the entire development, including the remainder of the landscaping. In relation to the habitats regulations, officers are satisfied that the proposed phasing plans would not have a material impact on the special protection area over and above that already considered and mitigated for. The site is sufficiently well separated from the SPA to avoid any direct impacts from the construction. And in relation to EIA, officers are satisfied that the construction implications of the development have already been considered within the environmental statement submitted with the original development and have been appropriately mitigated for in the method of construction statement and the working method statement secured by conditions. Officers are satisfied that the amended phasing plan would not lead to significant environmental impacts above that which have already been considered. It is important for members to note that if the application is considered to be a non-material amendment, there are unlikely to be effects which would need to be addressed under the EIA regulations. That is because the changes are, in effect, non-material. It is important for members to note that the consideration of this phasing plan should not be a comparison against the previously approved phasing plan, but instead a consideration of the current phasing plan and whether it materially alters the East Street development as a whole as it was approved. This phasing plan does not alter the final East Street development, which will be completed in accordance with the approved plans in an identical form to what has previously been approved. In officers' view, the considerations for members this evening are therefore whether the revised wording of the condition satisfies the purposes for which it was originally required. So the phasing plans provide an appropriate trigger for details to be submitted as required by various conditions on the main consent. The proposed phasing plan therefore meets the requirements of the original condition. The impact in highways terms. This is in relation to the early demolition of Brightwall Cottage prior to the construction of the bridge. For the reasons already outlined, the traffic impacts of this would not be significant and no material harm in this respect would be caused. And finally, would the change be material in combination with other NMA approvals? Other NMAs have been approved as set out in your agenda. However, the changes approved are insignificant and collectively, with this current NMA, do not result in a material amendment to the original application. Officers are therefore recommending approval of this non-material amendment application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Louise. Members. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you. I thought you were going to ask us to address any technical questions first of all, but if we're going to do that,
yes, please do.
if I can start off, because there are a couple of technical matters. I did put in a couple of questions in advance. I've noticed that the resiting of the substation, the electrical substation, is not proposed. Well, I don't know whether it's proposed or not, because this isn't a planning application, obviously, so it's not proposed, but we're being asked to, I think, grant consent to a phasing plan that includes doing it, and we don't have a planning permission for the resiting of that of the electricity substation, and the intention is to move it. I think it's later this year, September, so it's only a couple of months away, really, to outside the front door of 40 Degrees Youth Club. Now, so I want to know, is the resiting of that substation going to be subject to planning permission, and would we need to impose conditions, if we're agreeing this, to say that it must be subject to planning permission to make it clear that we're not granting a consent for that at this point? One of the difficulties with that is that it extends the project site boundary without consultation and EIA or appropriation of the land in order to locate it outside of what the parameters of the existing EIA. So, you know, we shouldn't be putting forward anything here.
Okay, should we let the officers answer that one, or see if they would like to answer that one, and then move on to more
yes,
questions?
I'd like clarification on that if you want to do that first. Thanks.
Okay, this phasing plan is only in relation to the development which has already been approved, so it doesn't grant permission for anything in additional. It just tells you timings of when certain things would happen. A lot of electricity undertakings can be done under permitted development, so that may be the case. And if it isn't done under permitted development, then it would require a separate planning application. So this phasing plan is only granting phasing for what has already been approved under the East Street development and goes no further than that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Louise. Councillor Hyman.
So if I can, just to confirm that, the fact that it's shown in this, in a different location with a star in this, does not mean that that's what, that there's any consent for it. So whatever's within this phasing plan is effectively theoretical. Okay. The demolition of Brightwell Cottage, I mean, we're meant to be considering this NMA in combination with other NMAs which have been granted, and just a fortnight ago on the 16th of July, the NMA 0039, or 2018-0039, which was to vary condition 35 of the 0268 consent to change the BAT condition to remove the compensation, the BAT house compensation for the loss of Brightwell's cottage. The demolition of that is being brought forward, and it's shown in here as being one of perhaps the most significant element of what's in front of us, of the decision that we're making. If we need to consider in combination impact of those two, then we need to have the BAT surveys or evidence that shows that there isn't any longer a maternity or two maternity roosts in the roof of that, because
okay, let's let the officers deal with that then. We'll go through these one by one.
Well, the question is the demolition of Brightwell Cottage subject to the discharge of condition 35, and you know, do we need to make sure that that's true?
Louise?
We are satisfied, as we were satisfied both for the BAT poll application and for the non-material amendment to change the BAT mitigation, that there are no maternity roosts on the site, and therefore they do not need to provide compensation for them. Thank you.
Okay. Did you have another question?
Well, yes, but in technical terms, finally, it's a concern that's been raised by Farnham Theatre Association in respect of the plans now showing that we have a hall route going right by the corner of Brightwell House, and that is of great concern. Now, I've looked through the plans, I've looked through the discharge of conditions for the listed building consent, and under the discharge of condition 5 in April, it has imposed a 3-metre exclusion zone around Brightwell House in order that there isn't any impact. Officers recall that? It's under discharge of condition 5. Does that cover the concern that we have, or because this road is shown to be going very close, this will not take precedence? Surely the drawings in here, although you describe them as detailed, the drawings certainly would not take precedence over a condition that's been, some very protective condition that we've already got in place, would it?
Good. Louise? Thank you.
No, the short answer is no. The conditions on the listed building consent are required. They would not be able to do any development within that 3-metre exclusion zone. In addition to that, I'll just remind members that it is an offence to cause any damage to a listed building, and the developers would be bound by that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. Just a variant of one of the questions Councillor Hyman asked. So I'm looking at addressing one of the questions from one of the representations regarding that damage to Brightwell's house that may or may not happen. So looking on page 22 of the papers, condition 2 in regards to the listed building consent, do we believe that those are still sufficient if the building's going to be left for a more significant amount of time than we were originally expecting? Do those need to be amended in any way to protect the building? Because as much as I know the developers will get fined if they cause damage or knock this down by mistake, I don't think people will take a huge amount of solace in that after the fact.
Louise, would you like to answer that?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we are satisfied that that condition protects that building during the construction works. Thank you.
Thank you. Shall we move on to the debate then, members? Councillor James.
I've just got one. On phasing, I've got no problem with the phasing, but just assume in the December bit that we're subject to 6 weeks of snow that's 8 metres deep. Presumably, work has to stop, so phasing would have to stop. Therefore, do they have to come back to change the phasing, or is that just a natural disaster and we just carry on?
Louise.
Thank you. The condition is really to require the order of things happening, and to ensure that for every time they start a certain part of the development, that they've discharged the conditions in relation to that part. There are dates indicated on these plans, but it is my view that if development was delayed at any point for any reason, provided they proceeded in the order of the phasing as set out, we would be satisfied as a council.
Thank you, Chairman. It seems a long time ago now that I used to work, but when I did, one of the things I had to do was negotiate oil exploration contracts with various governments around the world. And I had a couple of quite smart lawyers with me, and one of them I remember saying to me, whenever you write an agreement, always stick in words like reasonable and significant, because they have very different meanings to different people. And the officers are telling us today that the demolition of Brightwell's cottage will have no significant effect on traffic in Farnham. The whole point of this bridge was that we wanted no extra loads going through Farnham. Now, we've already had a little bit of, I hesitate to use the word subterfuge, but let's just say embellishment, when the original tennis court pavilion was knocked down and the stuff was carted away through Farnham. But we do not want any trucks carrying rubble trundling through our town. So to find Brightwell's cottage being demolished before the bridge is built and the whole point of the bridge being to avoid all the rubbish going through town, I find something that I just find unacceptable and actually quite offensive. That is my main objection. We could argue about materiality forever. I think anything that has a haul road in it now I would automatically object to because of the last disaster over the haul road going through Farnham. But basically, we got this bridge built in order to avoid rubbish going through our town. And now we're being told, well, this isn't significant. Anything is significant, and I will be voting against it unless someone can persuade me otherwise.
I thought this had been addressed in the report, but I'll let Louise address your concern, Councillor Ward.
Yeah, thank you. Just to remind you really that the test isn't that no vehicles can come through the town. The test as planning authority for which you are making your decision this evening is what are the material harms of this development and are they acceptable or unacceptable. So a couple of extra vehicles going through the town, is that materially harmful? In officers' view, that isn't. And in any event, the vehicles that are actually required to do this work are already going to be on site due to the utilities developments which are taking place. So effectively, there may be no additional vehicles required to demolish the cottage, but because that is a change, we have identified within the officers' report if there were no vehicles on site doing any of the other preparatory works, what would they be? And they are set out on page 20. And as you will see, there is 3 vehicles for the actual works themselves, and then the daily attendance by a site supervisor, a machine driver, and 1 labourer who, if driving, will park in Riverside Car Park. Of course, they may get to the site by public transport. But the short of it is that, you know, this quantum of development will not have an impact on vehicular movements within Farnham Town Centre because of the sheer small number of them. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. So just one quick question additional about the listed building consent for the cottage. Can I just confirm, because Councillor James, I think, brought this up with the weather issues. I know it was originally going to be a relatively short term, and so the details didn't probably include mitigations for certain types of weather. Do they update the details with how they're protecting that listed building consent if the weather is severe over that period? Because actually it's now going to be a lot longer, so we could quite easily see some different weather.
Louise?
So the answer is we are satisfied with that condition would protect the building during whatever weather event.
So in other words, though, you're not told anything new as to how the changes would be. So you're not told anything new about how they protect the building, even though the time frame has changed materially. No, the building would be required to be protected, whatever.
Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was concerned when I originally read that the Brightwell's cottage was going to come down prior to the bridge being finished, but then when we are told that firstly the plant is going to be on site beforehand, so there's no extra movement to bring that in, and then secondly that the spoil from the demolition of the cottage is not going to be removed until the bridge is up, so there will be no extra travel movements of lorries taking the spoil away, and all we're talking about is the odd workman who's going to have to come onto site to operate the machinery. It does seem to me totally and utterly acceptable.
Thank you. Councillor Isherwood.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Just an answer on the demolition of the building. We had Undershaw in Hindhead, a Grade 2 listed building that was without a roof, without windows and everything else for 6 or 7 years. The developers who eventually took it over made quite sure that they understood the Grade 2 listed building concerns, and I think I have every faith in Crest Nicholson maintaining the listed building. Really do. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Mulliner.
It's all right, Chairman. Councillor Goodridge covered the point I wish to make.
Councillor Hyman.
Perhaps perhaps we should avoid mentioning a memorial hall and how well that was looked after by the conditions and how satisfied we were with those. But I am very concerned that well, the way that we should be looking at this, what officers are saying, is looking at whether it is an NMA. That's the question in front of us. And the way to address that, or the best way to look at it, should be to look at the alternative, which is what we would expect to see in front of us, a Section 73 variation of condition minor material amendment application, which certainly where EIA development is concerned is what we would expect to have here. If this were a Section 73 variation of condition application in front of us, then I'm quite certain actually that I would expect to see the BAT reports in front of me, because they have never been placed there, from 2012 and 2015, where the surveys have been were conducted. We've never seen those; they haven't been published, I understand. But they are, the 2012 report was the basis of the 2013 summary that was put in front of us, which was used when the BAT House application came in front of us, or in front of members. Application 14/24/20 came forward in February 2015. And that BAT House report stated, I think it's 6 times in it, that they had found 2 pipistrelle maternity roosts in the roof spaces of Brightwell Cottage. And I know officers have said before, and they've said again this evening, that it's been established there isn't, or wasn't, or never has been any maternity roosts. But we know that Crest Nicholson would not have proposed a BAT house as compensation for the loss of those unless it was necessary. They certainly wouldn't have done so. They wouldn't have brought that forward. It was always an awkward thing that they had nowhere sensible to put. And they would not have put that application in. It was determined by officers by delegated powers. They wouldn't have put it in if those maternity roosts did not exist. We've got a report on record in the 14/24/20 papers that states repeatedly that there were maternity roosts there. And I think if we had this in front of us as a Section 73 application, then we would expect to have environmental impact assessment update with the evidence in respect of those maternity roosts, because it will have been in the 2012 unpublished 2012 batch survey report. Now that we have no way of knowing who the BAT expert was. It's never been told. I mean, this really hasn't been done properly. And as far as I'm concerned, without those reports, we cannot know what the impact, whether there are any impacts of this NMA that we don't know about. We do know that it's not true that there was no maternity roosts found. We know that. And so I think that we should, because we cannot possibly know without assessment what the impacts are going to be of this development, then that we should insist that this comes forward actually as a Section 73 application. To decide now that there are no, that it's non-material, when we know full well that this is bringing forward the demolition to very soon, in the absence of compensation, I think is something which I, in all good conscience, can't do, and I think there would have to be a challenge, in fact, and it concerns me that this is coming forward very soon, this demolition and loss, when we know we shouldn't be doing that. So I would like officers just to confirm, please, that in fact there is a BAT House application. The BAT House application did confirm that there were maternity roosts, and that we need to take account of that.
I'm sure they've got the gist of your concerns, and I'm sure they'd like to address your concerns.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This application before you this evening is to look at the order in which development which has already been granted will take place, and to determine whether that order makes a material change to the original scheme as approved. It is not for you to revisit applications that have already been approved. And again, I will repeat that we are satisfied that there is no maternity roosts, and the BAT houses were sufficient to mitigate for the impact in that respect. Thank you.
Councillor Townsend.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. As part of the preparatory works, phases 1 to 8, could you just confirm that that includes the new back poles that are being installed? And I have another question
I
as well.
can't personally, but I'm sure Louise can. So, would you like to address your other question?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. My second question is the demolition of Brightwell Cottage and the material to remain on site. Is that a condition? Is it enforceable? Thank you.
Okay, 2 questions for you there, Louise.
So the first question, I'm afraid I don't know off the top of my head whether the back pole itself is within the phasing plan. However, there are other conditions that require that to be erected prior to the demolition effectively of any roost. So there are other ways that that's protected. And secondly, in relation to the details of the material staying on site, yes, that would have to remain on site because they are bound by the phasing plan, which sets that out, and by their method of construction statement as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Adams.
Just a point of order, really, Chairman. Could we ask Councillor Hyman to use the word I instead of we when he's making a declaration of...
Any other comments before we move to the resolution? Recommendation, rather. Right, the recommendation is, as set out in the update sheet, that the non-material amendment application be approved as follows. The development shall be carried out in complete accordance with the agreed phasing programme, sketch number 10002-CNR-SK-0005, revision 8, sheets 01 to 33, unless otherwise agreed in writing by the local planning authority. Can I have all those in favour, please?
Chairman.
And those against?
2, Chairman.
Abstentions?
1, Chairman.
Right, that recommendation is carried. Thank you, members. So we move on to item 8, which is application reference WA 2018-0460, Hewitt's Industrial Estate, Elmbridge Road, Cranley, GU6 8LW, and this is for approval of reserve matters, appearance, landscaping, layout and scale, following the outline approval of WA 2014-2384 for the erection of 120 new dwellings with associated parking, landscaping, open space and works. And Richard is going to present this application. Richard.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. The report hopefully is self-explanatory. This is a reserve matters application following the grant of outline consent on appeal for 120 dwellings. So obviously the first point to make is that we're not here this evening to revisit the principle of the development. That was an issue that we considered at the time. We felt there was the concern about the loss of the industry and everything else. That's been dealt with now. So what we're here to look at this evening is those things in front of you: appearance, landscaping, layout and scale. And I think this slide, Louise, shows what was on the site. So in some ways, it's having visited it last week, it's almost totally hard-standing, hardcore, very, very sort of harsh appearance. So in terms of what we're looking at this evening, I think, given that the principle's been established, it's what can we do with a very hard urban appearance of a site. So, sorry, Lucy, you want to press on? There was an outline at outline consent. There was an indicative layout. This has been subsequently amended and revised several times through negotiations with the applicants to what one sees before you this evening. Just to look at it in terms of the access into the site, the northwest corner is the principal, thanks Louise, is the main access in. There's effectively a road running around a courtyard, thank you, and there's an access, there's a little cul-de-sac into a courtyard area there. In terms of that's the layout. In terms of the dwelling mix, there is a range of affordable. The scheme meets our affordable requirements as it did at outline stage, and it also meets our affordable dwelling mix. So we have 70% social rented and 30% intermediate housing proposed, and these are in three blocks. Now, I don't know actually whether it's shown on the slide, Louise, or not, in terms of where they are, but they're essentially in three groups. On the southern boundary of the site, next to the industrial estate there, near the entrance to the site, if you sort of go up to the northwest, yeah, and there's a few units on the eastern boundary as well. So we have the breakup. Hopefully, our housing colleagues are very happy with that. I know, having sat through the committee last week, I know the whole issue of pepper potting and tenure blindness is an issue. We think here that there's three areas within the site where there are affordable units proposed, which we think, as officers, is a good, satisfactory solution. Sorry, Louise, thank you. Sorry, there we are. Sorry, God. So that's where the affordable units are. So they are split up quite well within the site, in our view, and in our housing officers' colleagues' view. Sorry. The elevational treatment is in the report. It's a fairly traditional approach of slate tile hanging. There is some render in amongst the scheme, but that gives one a typical flavour of what the street would look like. And this shows the elevational treatment of the what I call 2.5 storey, where we have some dormer windows in the roof. Now, there were some concerns raised about this, but in officers' view, it's better to have 2.5 storeys and dormer windows in the roof designed in from day one, rather than face sort of speculative applications later on for ad hoc roof extensions. So actually, in our view, that is a fine and satisfactory approach. That's the flats. They are. Sorry, forgive me. Sorry, they are towards the 3-storey flats, towards the southern boundary, and that is juxtaposed against the remaining industrial estate. And in terms of bulk and massing, in terms of achieving an appropriate layout, again, officers are of the view that the best place in design terms to have the 3 storeys is well within the site, towards the industrial area, rather than on frontages where it's next to existing 2-storey dwellings. Again, sorry, yeah, no, show the photographs, Louise, that's fine. Yeah, there are some trees on the periphery of the site. As one can see, site clearance is already underway. None of those trees have preservation orders on them, although there is one particular oak, and I think that's probably in photograph. It's B in the photographs, but sorry if you keep going, Liz, you might say I'm pretty sure. Yeah, sorry, it is B, and one can see the amount of activity going on there already. That is close to the boundary. It's not covered by a TPO, but we are satisfied that, given the depth, the garden depth, some concerns, specific concerns, have been raised about this tree. Given the depth of gardens, which are 11 metres plus, that the future of that tree is secured. So, sorry, Jan, speaking to the mic again, apologies for that earlier. In terms of the master principle, I mentioned that earlier in my introduction. That's been established. The outline consent was given for 120 dwellings, so one has to look at, in this situation, how best to get 120 dwellings on this site at reserve matters stage. So it's not a question of revisiting that. The mix meets all our standards in terms of affordable housing mix, in terms of the tenure within the affordable housing. Contaminated land has been dealt with. It was interesting enough that they, again, anecdotally out on site, they took very, very serious precautions about the contamination. There's potential asbestos on the site. All I can just say, Chairman, is that they were taking that issue very, very seriously indeed. Noise impact, environmental health officers are satisfied that the Reserve Matters scheme means that the future occupants won't be subject to noise from the adjacent industrial site. Ecology, again, from what is there on there at the moment, there will only be a net improvement. The parking meets our standards. Highway safety was dealt with at outline stage. So the matters of judgment, as the right-hand side of the slide, as you look at it, is about layout design and impact on residential amenities. And I think it's worthwhile at this juncture, Chairman, saying that we've only received 3 representations to this application. The Parish Council are broadly content. I would just add to conclude that there's an update sheet and an update sheet to the update sheet to further confuse things. There was an update sheet circulated with some revised and amended conditions which have been agreed largely with the applicants, and also a further update on the yellow sheet before you, which was circulated this evening, reflecting changes to the MPPF, which I think we probably haven't got onto this evening yet, but and some other further comments. But in the round, Chairman, our officer's view is that as far as the Reserve Matters scheme goes, this is a good scheme, given that there's an outline consent. It's working within the parameters of that outline consent. There's been detailed negotiations that have gone on, and as far as I'm concerned, Chairman, it meets our objectives in terms of housing delivery, a good mix. It's also a good mix of dwellings. In the report itself, it shows that this meets what we're trying to achieve in the SHMA in terms of size, numbers of bedrooms and things like that. So all in all, officers are very content with the scheme, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, before I throw it open to the members, I've got a query, condition 11, which is prior to the commencement of development and before any alteration of the existing condition of the site takes place. And then it goes on to say about tree protection. But judging from the photograph, the diggers are already in, crashing around that oak tree that people would like protected.
On that specific point, again, on site, we raised this with the site manager, and the obvious point was it isn't covered by a tree preservation order. So in theory, the on site they could have just ripped the tree out, and in their defence, they're as I said, they're responsible people, and so we're quite happy that condition, and they're quite happy with that, will look after that specific tree. And I was, so one goes on site quite often, Chairman, and I was really pleased to see that they could have gone in there.
So the trees are being protected as we speak.
Yeah,
Jolly good, thank you. Members. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Chairman. As was mentioned, the Parish Council, I understand, are broadly supportive of the application. There have been several changes, and I'm very pleased to see that they have moved the bins, so they're not a prominent feature within the application. I'm a little bit disappointed with the 2.5-storey houses. They are extremely tall, and they are backing on to to other houses. Granted, there were buildings here previously, but they were set back from the boundary, and they weren't that tall on this edge of the site. So it is a bit disappointing. I'm assuming that there's no windows in the back of these. Perhaps officers could just confirm that there are no windows in the rear of these roofs. Thank you.
Richard?
Not so that there's direct. I mean, the first thing I would say through you, Chairman, is that there's no. The separation distances meet our guidelines, and there's nothing, from my recollection, and I will check again through you, Chairman, that anything at 2.5-storey level that's potentially overlooking any existing properties or occupiers backing onto there. So what I'm saying is that it is normal to have first floor windows that meets our separation guidance. In this instance, there's not any dormer windows which would potentially overlook adjacent existing properties.
Thank you. Councillor Townsend.
Could I just have clarification that the windows of those properties that are on the northern boundaries have not got similar windows like that at the front looking over the back, please? Or are they just roof lights?
Richard?
Through you, Chair, they are just, Chairman, they're just, the only rear windows are roof lights, and I would just re-emphasise as well that the separation distance on the northern boundary certainly exceeds, and I don't know if, Louise, if you can get the, sorry, if you can get the site plan up. Yeah, on the northern boundary, the separation distances, as one can see, well exceed anything that we would be looking for. So all in the round, we're satisfied that there's no overlooking issues either of gardens or personal privacy, Chairman.
Councillor Townsend, do you wish to come back?
I'm not completely comforted by those words, I'm afraid. I would have liked to have seen a picture or be confirmed that there were no windows on what is effectively the third floor, because there are obviously cottages behind there, existing ones that you can see. I'm finding it difficult that I haven't got an answer to that question yet, but can I just move on a little bit? We are, it's a brownfield site, which is good to see in Cranley. I am glad to see that they're adding street trees and also the hedging to soften the parking areas, which is really good. Bit disappointed they're not using more native species, and I wasn't satisfied with the comment that they just grow too big. It seemed a little bit dismissive. There are lots of native species which don't grow too big rapidly. So I was a little bit disappointed with that. I was a bit the condition about the external lighting on condition 14 was referring to the outline application, wasn't it? It was.
Suggestion.
Thank you. Also, my last just concern is about the water and the water pressure. I noticed that Thames Water said that when it leaves their pipes that they're getting 9 litres per second. We have had considerable problems with burst water pipes within Cranley recently since new development is coming online, and I'm very concerned that this is going to add to pressure on the already ageing water system, and that there will be additional bursts in the vicinity of this site. But I suppose that's down to Thames Water to mitigate against. So one of the last points I want to make is this is in a built-up area in Cranley. There are several properties on the northern edge and on the western edge of this site. And I would urge Miller Homes to consider setting up a liaison group, as was done on Amlets Lane, to keep all the residents around there informed, and also to let them know what's going on a regular basis, because it has worked on other sites, and I think it would be really good if they did set up a liaison group on this site as well. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. I totally agree with your sentiments about the liaison group. They do work well. Richard, did you wish to address that?
Yeah, sorry, just addressing Councillor Townsend's very last point. Yes, again, the relationship between the developers and the neighbours is very good from what I can establish, from what I've seen in the brief time I was there, and I'm sure that won't be an issue with them. I've got to speak with the agent anyway following this evening's meeting, so I will pick that point up, Councillor, if that's okay with you.
Thank you. Councillor Mulliner.
Thank you, Chairman. I will just pass my opinions that I'm not impressed by the rectangular and linear nature of the layout. I don't know whether it's possible, but a more interesting and layout with a few curves would have seemed to me to be an improvement. And secondly, looking on pages 32 and 33, and maybe these are giving an unnecessarily unflattering opinion, but there's an extraordinary regularity of the 33 is the one that really catches the eye. Those very tall 2.5-storey ones in a line. The whole thing just looks, yes, those looks well, something out of The Hobbit, to be honest, and not Hobbiton either. We obviously have an ability during reserved matters to try and impose some design standards, and I'm sorry to see that we don't seem to have brought more variety and interest into the layout and the arrangement of the houses here. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, certainly I share Councillor Mulliner's concerns about the design, and it's not particularly inspiring. I appreciate it's not easy either when you're building a large number of homes and to make them all look different, but I think I would like to see another design with some curved roads and certainly not the regimented sort of design that we've got at the moment, but that's just my own personal opinion. I am worried, as are some of, still obviously, some of the residents of Cranley in respect of infrastructure, Old Road, ability to cope, and sewerage system. Councillor Townsend, thank you, has covered the water issue, which I think is of great concern. One thing I did want to ask, there's two things remaining really, which is the electric charging points and the ancient woodland buffer. So I'd like to know whether the concerns which have been raised by residents in respect of the road intruding into the ancient woodland buffer, whether that is true and whether it's something that we should look at again in view of perhaps the MPPF revision that's just been put forward. In terms of the electric charging points, I note that they're going to provide a 13-amp socket near the homes. I know when we were discussing the Woolmead last week, and I suggested maybe we have a condition, or maybe the condition should require the cabling or the ducting to be put in place. That wasn't a good idea, but apparently it's a good idea tonight. So are we going to have some sort of consistency in our decision making, or have I misunderstood in that respect? Thank you.
I seem to remember that you put forward an amendment for Badshot Lee, and it was agreed. And Badshot Lee was approved on your suggestion, Councillor Hyman, that we had a 100% charging facility.
Ward. But the Woolmead wasn't.
Councillor Ward, it was your suggestion. Okay, thank you. Okay, well, jolly good. Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm afraid I agree with Councillor Mulliner entirely. I think this is unimaginative. I'm sure the outline permission gave up to 120 homes. It didn't say had to be 120 homes. And if you'd cut down the number of homes and changed it, as Councillor Mulliner suggested, with a few curves of change, it would look a lot better. I also think that the houses are really, I mean, so unimaginative, it's just ridiculous. I thought we'd moved away from these identikit houses. We've made so much of a point of it on other developments in Cranley. There should be many more houses in this development which reflected what was going on in the Cranley High Street. So I'm very disappointed, to be honest, with this, and I'm not happy with it at all. Chairman, a couple more detailed questions. I'm not sure where the visitor parking is for this, because certainly there's the housing. I can see there's garaging around the houses, but I'm not sure where the visitor parking is, and there's only the one access, so they've all got to get in there. And the last thing is, I didn't see a table in the report on the room sizes of these homes. I'm not sure where I missed that. Maybe it was in the outline report.
Officers, did you wish to respond?
On the room sizes point, yes, they do meet our standards. Chairman, I apologise if it's not in the body of the report, but they do.
And I think if I remember rightly, visitor parking is scattered throughout the site, isn't it?
Yes, it is, Chairman. Yep.
Thank you. Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I suppose I agree with most people. I'm greatly relieved that Councillor Townsend went first, because it's always good to hear from the local. And I've driven past this site, I don't know how many times, and thought, well, if I were going to build houses in Cranley, I'd build it here, not on some of the other sites. So I'm delighted that it is here before us. It's funny, isn't it? No building site comes quite in the shape you'd like it to come. You know, we had Little Acres last week. It's a bit like Goldilocks, isn't it? And that was far too long and thin. And here we've got one which is far too boxy. And it does make it difficult to do a good design. I mean, I know when we were little, we used to do wavy lines, all of this, and, you know, try and make things look pretty. But we've got to be practical here, and we have to fit in a certain number of homes. I'm not so appalled at the the three-storey, but I am still waiting for reassurance that there are any roof lights in the back. You know, I'm sure we must know that. I couldn't give permission if there's any doubt that the third storey overlooked those cottages. So I do hope somewhere along the line somebody can tell us what's to the back of those houses. But actually, it's not my favourite layout. But given the constraints of the site, and given that I think the houses are actually more varied than they appear in our report, if I'm reading the report correctly rather than just looking at the pictures, I don't think it will be quite as monochrome as it appears in our report. Yes, I think this is on balance acceptable. Not my ideal. I'm never going to get it, am I, any more than anybody else sitting in this council chamber? But given the situation and the outline permission, I think this is probably acceptable. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Denis.
Thank you. If I was going to describe that plan, it looks like a Scotty dog, actually, with a head and a tail, but there we go.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah.
So, but that must be me just sitting there looking at it. I think the positive, I'll start off with the positive, is there is some breakup of the affordable housing. And, you know, when we're told it can't be done, it can be done. You know, being 50 yards apart or 100 yards is not difficult. So that to me is a positive. Much has been mentioned about the design. I think it's absolutely awful, if I'm honest. This has got to be one of the worst designs I've seen. It's just like holiday caravans. It's just in lines. There's no imagination. I appreciate the pictures we've been put up. May only be a few of the different designs, but the designs of the places look awful as well. I'm also a bit concerned about the 2.5-storey buildings. I'm concerned that we're sort of doing it now so we avoid further applications. You know, we're almost doing it to save us work. I don't think we should be doing that. That doesn't sit comfortably with me at all. A final point, because I could go on about the design, because I think it's that bad. We talked about the residents' liaison meeting, and those who go to them, I go to one, they are absolutely brilliant. The one thing is, I think mine is subject to a condition. I'm pretty sure there's a condition on when it was set many years ago that they had to meet 3 times a year as a liaison group. And I wonder why we never put it as a condition to make sure it is then done. Maybe that could just be answered, please.
Elizabeth, did you want to come in and address any of those points? Richard?
Yeah,
Okay, sorry.
I will try and wrap up a few of those points raised in debate, Chairman. First of all, in terms of the issue of roof lights and separation distances, some members might have seen the scale rule coming out, as it does from time to time, and the separation distance is about 45 metres, which well exceeds separation distances, our standard separation distances. In terms of the community liaison, Elizabeth has informed me that we are more than happy to put a condition on to that effect. And just to wrap things up from my perspective, Chairman, there is a consent for 120, and it is for 120. It's not up to 120, Chairman. And one can say, well, that was a mistake on the inspector's part, but the inspector's not here to defend themselves. So we are dealing with what we have, Chairman. And as I said, I think in the introduction to the presentation, there has been lengthy negotiations. Officers and the applicants have tried their best to come up with a good solution, including the housing mix on this site to essentially achieve the 120 houses, homes that have been granted. So it is before you, Chairman, I think is all I would say by way of summing up. I don't know, Elizabeth, really want to add anything to that, but...
Thank you, Chairman. Only to add that whilst we did lose this appeal, it is a planning permission and we've clearly had to move on. As Richard has said, unlike some outlines, this is an establishment of 120 dwellings. So the officer team has worked quite hard with the applicant to try and resolve that number of dwellings, which, to be honest, they're entitled now to resolve on the site in an acceptable way. There are different ways of doing it, and this is probably, yes, admittedly more regimental than some schemes that we've approved, but this is an urban site. This is a brownfield site where we are encouraged by the revised NPPF to make best use of and achieve an efficient use of land, which in the end should, in theory, relieve pressure on greenfield sites. So this is an opportunity to achieve slightly higher density, given it's already been established, in an efficient way to ensure making best use of this site where the principle's already been established. There probably are different ways of designing this, but I think our advice to you is that considering that the attempts that have been made to get this right, that complies with all our guidance, it probably would be very difficult to defend a refusal in design terms here. So I can understand there may be preferences for doing it a different way, but our conclusion would be, members, that this is an acceptable reserved matters layout. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, bearing in mind the shape of the site, bearing in mind the fact that planning permission and outline's been given for 120 dwellings, it's very difficult to imagine how you could get 120 dwellings in there by having a wavy line anywhere. The only wavy bit is in the Scotty dog's head. But the main bulk of it, it seems to me you've got a square, and what else? Where else can you put the road apart from following the square? The one thing that we haven't got, of course, is a street scene along the flats on the southern side, and I'm sure if we saw it, it would be pretty horrendous, because you've got lots of those all stuck together. If you saw them in a row, it's more or less continually bricked up area. But having said that, it does back on to the non-domestic housing. It's the industrial estate, I think. So, if you're going to put it anywhere, that's the right place to put it. And you can't get the numbers of dwellings in without having it there. So, accepting the constraints of the site and the fact that we've got to put 120 houses on this site, I can't see any other way of doing it. And on balance, I'm satisfied that this is the best that can be achieved.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Chairman, I have to justify me going to collect my card. Yes, I am concerned about this particular development. for a few reasons. I look back on the MPPF, and assuming that the revised one has not altered its emphasis on good design, I find many points in this particular layout that do not represent what I consider good design. And I think if we had good design actually implemented, then that would make a positive contribution to people's health and well-being, which I thought was one of the priorities of this council. So I'm just going to pass a few comments, if I may. Thinking about the access there, and I know it's all been approved, but I'm just thinking about the morning period when people are leaving all these buildings in their vehicles, and the build-up of queues, and the fact that there is a constriction there which allows just one direction at any time. And then there's also the peak time in the evening where the situation is reversed. So I can see vehicles actually queuing up on the main road there, and anything that's queuing up within the site is not particularly helpful to the residents. I find end-on parking not a very effective and practical way. So therefore, almost immediately there will be quite a number of vehicles parked on the road, impeding traffic flows. Those are certainly certain things. And there's one other thing that I don't easily see a decently wide footpath. And by that I mean to allow for the passage of, say, a mobility scooter and a parent pushing a child in a buggy. We do not really want, for health and well-being purposes, somebody being forced out into the road, even though that might be a truly residential road. And so those are the sorts of things that I would like to see that in future designs and developments included, so that we can actually positively say to people who are concerned about these things, well, look, these are positive points that represent a significant improvement on what we've been used to over this last 20, 30 years, where there's been increasingly compacting of accommodation and making it much worse to live in. So I certainly won't be buying one of these places, and I couldn't recommend one to buy. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. I'm also pleased that it's on brownfield, and there seems to be a lot of variation in the size of the properties, which is good because there's a lot of 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom, which is something we were talking about last week with the Woolmead. It actually does achieve our 30% goal, and actually it's actually happening this time, unlike the Woolmead last week, which I found extremely disappointing, as did many other members. Would you mind in a second just taking us back to the distribution of the affordable housing? Can I just ask, before I go on to further questions, are the green and the pink all affordable housing in that diagram?
Through you, Chairman, yes, they are.
Right, so the distribution, there's a bit of an affordable housing row at the back there, which I agree also does go into that design of there's going to be a big solid wall of brick there at the back, which I think goes into the design is a little uninspiring. Can I just also ask officers to answer Councillor Hyman's question regarding ancient woodland, because I think it was missed in your response a little while back. And final thing, regarding the overlook of the 2-storey properties, which I have to say I personally really dislike. If we have that sort of property again on a boundary, could we insist on having a 360-degree view of that sort of structure, so that questions like the one that Councillor Townsend has raised, which are completely legitimate, can be easily answered with just a picture of the back? Thank you.
Thank you. Richard, would you like to address the woodland issue?
Yeah, through that was picked up, Chairman, at outline stage, and again, having been out on site, I can guarantee members there's no impact on that, and we're satisfied with that, but it was looked at outline stage. So just picking up some earlier points as well, as regards the access, that was equally approved at outline stage, and in terms of there is use of shared surfaces in the site, and the Highways Authority are content with the layout in terms of the interior of the scheme and how it works in terms of pedestrian and vehicular movements. And I'm trying to remember what the third point was, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. Just quickly, in consideration of... Apologise.
The third point was just on having a 360-degree view for the houses in future when they're of that proportion.
Yeah, we happily pick that up, Chairman.
A note for the future. I mean, presumably you've got rear elevations of his drawings there, haven't you? And have they got dormer windows or roof lights?
Just I'll go into the file whilst
We'll
we're debating, Chairman, if that's all right.
Councillor Townsend, do you wish to come back or add another point?
Thank you, Chairman. Just one little point. On this southwest corner, the Scotty dog's head, on his chin, there are some established trees there, and there is an area of planting around there. I couldn't quite grasp from the drawings of the landscape what was actually being planted there, and I just wanted confirmation, perhaps, of the planting scheme around that area, please, so it didn't end up as a piece of sort of wasteland. Thank you.
Do we have those details, officers, or do you want to come back to that one? Come back to them. Councillor Coburn, you wish to come back?
It's very much on the point the Councillor Follows and Councillor Townsend made. Separation isn't my issue. It is what's behind those buildings. We've got a list of names of buildings, you know. I mean, are those 3 stories? Are they Edales, Ingleby's, Bramley's, whatever? We've got names of these buildings, so somewhere there must be a picture of them front and back. If you give me a name, I'm sure I can find it on the internet. I just find it quite amazing that I cannot be told or reassured. I mean, I have no problem with this. Well, I'm going to accept this layout given the constraints on the site, but I would be very, very worried unless I am reassured that we're talking roof lights in the rear elevation of those 2.5-storey houses. So please, I can't believe we haven't got that information.
Thank you. Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chairman. As you know, I'm kind of keen on electric charging points. And although we're only giving them 3-pin, 3-amp sockets and not fast charging, I'll settle for that as at least a step in the right direction. I'm a little bit concerned at the bottom of our update sheet on page 2. It says the agent has clarified the position with regards to the provision, but I don't find it anywhere in the conditions. So why isn't it in the conditions, and where can I find something that will enforce this?
Richard?
Yeah, two points, Chairman. On that, there was a condition imposed at outline stage about the charging, and we've also been talking with the applicants of this scheme about that in terms of the detail. In terms of individual units, there will be, we've been assured, although there's clearly a discharge of that condition to go through, that process has to be gone through yet, that there will be a charging point for each individual unit and also shared facilities as well. So if I can just cover that point off, Chairman. As regards the second point, which again, through recollection, dormers, yes, sorry, thank you, Louise. Just check the plans on that. There's no roof lights proposed in those rear elevations on the north. There's no dormer windows. No.
Sorry, Councillor Ward, you'd like to come back briefly, yes?
Yes, indeed I would. I'm sure the agent's a terribly nice, honest chap and all that, and I'm sure this is a great way to do it. But as we are constantly told, we are deciding on the application before us, and the application before us does not have this as a condition, and I don't really see why, if it's all been hunky-dory and agreed beforehand, that it cannot be in there as a condition, because I'm sorry, I don't find this verbiage very convincing.
Officers, do you wish to respond? I mean, I understood you to say that there is already a condition on the outline permission that has to be discharged before. Yes. So it's covered, Councillor Ward.
I'm not sure that I totally agree with that, Mr. Chairman, wise though you are. We have had a few conditions discharged recently which have not been discharged in the way I believe councillors intended them. So I would like to see something written down somewhere that says it is a condition that they will all have these 3-pin 13-amp sockets. And I see nothing in writing before me.
Okay, Richard?
We're just confirming that, Chairman, if the committee would just bear with us 1 minute.
Elizabeth.
Chairman, if I could help here, I think that the important point is members, clearly, as you're aware, you are not revisiting the outline application. You need to accept outline permission has been granted. As Richard has said, there is a condition on the outline permission. The reserve matters and the outline together constitute the planning permission. So you do not repeat conditions on the reserve matters that are on the outline. There's no need to. It would be poor practice. It's not required. And I understand if you're expressing concerns about the discharge of conditions, but you do need to place some faith in the process that if there's a condition on a permission, it's incumbent on the applicant to discharge that condition with the planning authority, including submitting the required details to enable us to agree it. So to give you comfort, it's on the outline, it doesn't need to be repeated on the reserve matters, and it is covered off, and that's the point I think that Richard was making. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Byam.
Thank you, Chairman. I, like many others, don't particularly like the design of the building. There are too many gable ends, square shapes as we look at them here on the drawings. But one of the points I'd like to make, which I'm repeating from probably 6 months, maybe 12 months ago, the way that we project onto the screen is incorrect. It is narrow, and therefore it makes all the properties that we look at taller than they actually are in the drawings that you have on your iPad or anywhere else. They always look tall. Those buildings there specifically look much taller there on the screen than they do on my iPad. And it's all to do with the way we projected. And we were told when I was Vice Chairman that we were going to bring in a new system which was going to cope with that problem. It looks distorted and it affects the way that people look at it and think about it and respond to the application.
Thank you. Councillor Band.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, Elizabeth Sims has made the point which I was going to make. I mean, we are where we are because we have an existing outline condition. Waverley originally refused the outline permission, but it were overturned on appeal. So we're having to look at this layout in the context of what's been imposed upon us. And I think, given that, I'm not over happy with the layout. I can see it is probably what is required to fit 120 dwellings onto this congested site. The great news is I think it is a site which is worth developing in the middle of Cranley. It is a brownfield site. Has been a historically run-down industrial area. There's a lot of remedial work to be done to get into a decent state. And I think, as Councillor Fellows has said, the fact we've got 30% affordable houses on this site for the site, this size of site, into these conditions is something well worth supporting. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Band. Councillor Hyman.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. As I started saying, Councillor Lee had asked the question as to, or didn't ask the question, but assumed that the new MPPF 2018 revised MPPF doesn't change things materially in respect of how we treat design. I've only had a chance to look through the revised MPPF very briefly over the weekend. I'm sure nobody else has probably had the time to go through it in any great detail either. But it looks to me as though there is a greater emphasis, in fact, in design and what people call placemaking. So I think it's unclear to me how much more discretion we have as members than we did last week. And I'm wondering whether officers are in a position to be able to perhaps give us a little bit more detail in respect of that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Louise?
Yes, the previous MPPF did place an emphasis on good design, and the new NPPF does again, and there is some more detailed wording on that. We have looked at the scheme, particularly in comparison to what exists on the site at the moment, which is a material consideration that I would remind members of. This is a brownfield site, and you must take that into consideration with how you are considering the proposal. We are satisfied that the proposal is of a good design and is suitable for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chairman. Just one simple question, if I could. I can't quite see where either any leap or lap is on this area. If I could have an answer to that, I'd like to follow that up with something.
It's in the bottom left-hand corner, Councillor Gray.
Well, that's where I would have assumed it to be, and I think that that's going to be some difficulties for this particular layout, because I can't see the children in these streets with the long, straight avenues are going to walk right across there to that bottom corner. It's an awful long way from the top of the dog's head. I do have concerns about the layout. I can't see what an alternative would be, but I do think there are going to be a number of practical living issues that the people who are buying these houses are going to have, but I can't really object to it purely on the grounds that I don't like it, and I think there may be problems.
Thank you. Councillor Townsend, did you wish to come back with a new point?
I just wondered about my question about the landscaping. I didn't actually get an answer to that. And it is important because despite what you might see on the Scotty Dog's head there, on the right-hand side of the site there, the eastern side, there are actually other houses. And it's important that that little area doesn't end up becoming a dumping ground for grass cuttings or something like that. So I just would like to know, because the code when I looked at the landscaping plan, it looks like grass there, but when you look on the actual landscaping plan, there is a different code on it, and I just wanted reassurance as to what was being planted on the perimeter edge on that side, because it does actually, it is a boundary on existing housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Officers?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Sorry, we hadn't lost sight, Councillor, of that question. If you can just bear with us again 1 minute, we'll check the plan, but it might be possible to get a further condition imposed on that specific area to tighten that up. I mean, the report is clear about what's generally proposed, but I fully take Councillor's point about an illustrative plan showing what appears to be trees. Is it going to be grass? What is it actually going to be in reality? So we could tidy that up with a further condition, Chairman.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor James.
Thank you, Chairman. The debate about the 2.5 stories with the one dormer window in the front, I presume then that is just one whole room with one window. If there are no windows at the back or the sides in the window, in the roof, I can't believe it. And that brings me back to my point always about permitted development rights, because there's nothing to stop any of those houses putting a roof light in any of those roof aspects. There's nothing in the conditions to stop it. So they could have a dormer window on the front, then they could put a roof light and 2 in the back, because I cannot believe that the whole of that roof space has just got one window. My second point is that whilst I dislike the design and the layout and everything else, it's not my site, but if that was in Battersea or Fulham, we'd all be very grateful for these houses. They're all separated, they're not in rows, which they'd be worth 2.8 million, and they've all got gardens. So as it's in the middle of Cranley, I think that the people who are buying them and moving in will be very grateful. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Officers, did you wish to address either of those points?
Yeah, Chairman, yes, we can certainly add a condition withdrawing permitted development rights for roof space.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, thank you for letting me come back. Just making the point that in this particular site, it is, as someone just said, in the middle of Cranley, and therefore one way of getting more a fixed number of dwellings into a set area, but with more space around, is of course to have more blocks of flats in it. You wouldn't try that too far out of town, but just for future reference, I think if we do face this sort of thing again, I hope that might be borne in mind when the officers are negotiating with the developers how to meet a particular number. Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody? Okay, good. So, officers, have we got, we've been talking about additional conditions. One to remove permitted development rights. One regarding local liaison, and charging points. Were we going to toughen that one up or leave it as it is? That's covered in outline.
Sorry, Chairman. On the charging point issue, there is an update on the update sheet about that point. There is a condition on the original consent. We are in discussion with the applicants about the discharge of that condition, and I think the update sheet makes it clear about where we are on that discussion and liaison with them, Chairman.
Okay.
So I think, just to echo what Elizabeth said, I think at the moment as it stands, there's 2 extra conditions that we would be landscaping, withdraw the permitted development rights.
Landscaping, yes.
Sorry, and community liaisons. Thank you, colleagues.
Councillor Ward, do you wish to come back?
Yes, I remain an unhappy bunny about this electric thing, I'm afraid. If we just look on page 3, first paragraph in the next to last sentence, he has confirmed a socket can be located. I'm not very sort of reassured by that. Lots of things can be done. Now, if we pop in the word will, I'm feeling much happier, but you know, we can do lots of things. I could do a Zumba dance for you, but you wouldn't want me to greatly. I remain, and having just heard what's being said, I earlier was slightly encouraged that the condition had been sorted out from before, but the words I just heard were, we are still in discussion. So no, I'm not happy that this condition has been sorted out as written down here and to my satisfaction.
Louise.
Thank you, Councillor. Just to read out the condition that was attached to the outline permission. No development shall take place until full details of a scheme for the provision of electric vehicle charging points within the development have been submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. The development shall be carried out in accordance with the approved details prior to the first occupation of the development and shall be retained for as long as the development remains in existence. So we are satisfied that we can and shall achieve electric vehicle charging points prior to the occupation of any of those dwellings on the site, and they need to submit them to us, and we will not approve them until we are satisfied that a sufficient number have been provided. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Follows, you wish to come back?
Thank you for, first of all, answering the thing I was going to ask, which was to read the condition out in full. And secondly, what do you class as sufficient? Because last week when we were talking about the Woolmead, sufficient was 100%. Is that the way that officers would go in this particular matter?
So the Surrey guidance sets out that electric vehicle charging points shall be provided for 20% of flats and one electric vehicle charging point per dwelling. So effectively, I don't know on this scheme, most of the dwellings are houses, so they have to be provided with the one vehicle charging point, and then for the flats it is the slightly lower number of just 20% of the flats as a whole.
Very quickly, yes.
So as much as then the original condition does give some scope for having electric charging points, if we wanted to have one for every single property, would we be able to condition that now at this stage?
Effectively, the horse has bolted on that. The condition is there. The inspector has found that to be acceptable, and it would be unreasonable to reattach a condition that has already been provided on the outline scheme. So, unfortunately, in this instance, it wouldn't be appropriate to revisit that issue. Thank you.
Councillor Hunter.
I did submit a written question about Surrey being involved with the allocation of charging points. What's it got to do with Surrey? This is Waverley, it's not a highway. This is a development, and I haven't received an answer to that yet.
Richard?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, we did receive your request, Councillor, and I think the simple answer is that Surrey County Council are the Highways Authority, and they are charged, excuse the pun, with the delivery of sustainable transport, and clearly electric vehicles are sustainable transport of the future. And just as an aside, Chairman, whilst one likes to exchange one's phone charger these days, 20 years' time, I think the future will be is that, sorry, can I borrow your car charger to charge my car up? And people will do that quite happily. So it's about, I fully take your point about whose responsibility is it, Councillor, and I'm not being flippant. It's a very valid point. At the moment, it is the County Council as the Highways Authority responsible for sustainable transport, and we take their advice from them. But certainly picking up from the points that were raised last week at committee, we're more than happy to pick that up as an issue with them and look at a way of sort of broadening out the discussion with members about this.
Now you've got me confused now. I thought we'd agreed that we were going to go for 100% on the housing and 20% on the flats. Yes, that is what we, when they come to discharge the condition on the outline approval, that is what we will be pushing for.
So I think it's important to emphasise that the condition on the outline will be discharged as a discharge of condition. I think in doing that, on your behalf as officers under delegated powers, we're mindful of your aspiration to optimise the use of electrical vehicle charging points. There are some limitations at times on capacity and indeed on practicalities, but we are taking a very strong steer from the committee that this is a really important issue for you, and we will bring that into the discussions and negotiations with the applicant on the discharge of the condition. Thank you, Chairman.
We could always direct them to the nearest Sainsbury's and they can charge their cars for nothing there. So it's jolly good, isn't it? Can I move on to the revised recommendation? Sorry, Liz, did you want to come back?
I just wanted to scoop up a couple of questions that weren't actually asked by me, but there was a question earlier about pavements, and there was also a question about woodland, and I just wanted to seek reassurance on both those points,
both
please.
were addressed by the officers, Councillor Townsend, yes. It's a shared surface scheme, so there aren't distinct footpaths, and the ancient woodland was addressed at outline stage. May I move on to the recommendation? Yes, the revised recommendation is that subject to conditions 1, 3, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13 and 15 as contained in the officer's report, and conditions 2, 5, 7, 9 and 16 contained within this addendum, that's the latest, no, the first update sheet, and additional conditions regarding local liaison, removal of permitted development rights and landscaping. This application is recommended for approval. Can I have all those in agreement, please?
I think 17.
Against?
None.
Abstentions?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Good. So that recommendation is agreed. Thank you, members, for your time, and safe journey home.